Alaric Vane, Lord of the Shadowed Realm, King of the Eternal Night, and Sovereign of the Blood Court, was having a crisis. It was not a crisis of statecraft, nor a looming war with the were-clans of the North. It was a crisis of a distinctly 21st century nature, delivered via a crisp, neutrally toned email attachment. A PDF. The sheer indignity of it. He sat not upon his throne of obsidian and bone, but in a well-worn secret lab gaming chair in a soundproofed study deep within the castle's ancient heart. The only light came from the glow of his 3 monitors, illuminating a face that had seen 1,000 years pass, and yet was currently contorted in a very modern expression of pure, unadulterated panic. For the last 2 years, he had been Lord of Lore on Discord. It was a stupid name, he knew that, but it was a pun, and he was secretly, deeply proud of it. As Lord of Lore, he wasn't a king. He was just a guy with a dry wit, an encyclopedic knowledge of ancient history, for obvious reasons, and a crippling addiction to a niche server dedicated to deconstructing bad fantasy tropes. It was there, in the #WorldBuildingWoes channel, that he had met her. Pixel_Vixen. She was brilliant. She was hilarious. Her takedowns of lazy elven naming conventions were legendary. Her memes about overpowered protagonists were works of art. Over 2 years of late-night chats, collaborative shitposting, and heated debates about the logistical impossibilities of dragon-based economies, she had become his closest confidant. His only friend, if he were being honest with himself. He knew she worked a boring government job, lived in a tiny apartment with a cat named Goose, and believed pineapple on pizza was a crime against nature. A stance he found barbaric but endlessly amusing to debate. He knew the sound of her typing, the specific cadence of her jokes, the way she used an ellipsis to convey withering sarcasm. He knew her mind, and he was, to his profound terror, quite smitten with it. And now, staring at him from the PDF on his center monitor, was her face. Integration Office Assignment, Aldrich Accord Tech Support, Veteran Integration Specialist. Nora Delacroix. Client, Vane Alaric. Regnal title, King. Assignment, Basic Digital Literacy and Mobile Device Operation. Notes. Client has filed a formal request for assistance, citing profound technological impairment and a desire to better connect with the modern world. High priority, sensitive case. Alaric felt the blood drain from his face, a sensation he hadn't experienced since the 14th century. Nora Delacroix. Pixel_Vixen. It was her. The same wry smile he'd seen in the one selfie she'd ever posted. The same intelligent eyes that he imagined were, at this very moment, rolling at some bureaucratic absurdity. She was coming here. To teach him how to use a phone. Him, the man who had written a 10,000-word treatise on the socio-economic impact of cryptocurrency on undead marketplaces, just for fun. The man who ran 3 highly successful meme accounts on Instagram, 2 of which were dedicated to cats. The man who had once successfully rickrolled his entire royal council during a Zoom call about tax reforms. His first instinct was pure, primal vampiric power. He could cancel the appointment. He could have the integration office dismantled. He could erase all records of his existence from their servers. He had the power. He had the influence. His second, more human instinct was to throw his expensive keyboard against the stone wall and curl into a ball of shame. What would she think? For 2 years he'd been her equal, her witty online sparring partner. Now she would see him for what he was. A 1,000-year-old monarch living in a Gothic monstrosity. A literal relic. The power imbalance was colossal. The friendship they'd built on a level playing field of anonymous text would shatter against the reality of him being the vampire king. She would be deferential. She would be intimidated. Or worse, she wouldn't be, and she'd hate him for the lie of omission. He had never lied, precisely. He just hadn't mentioned the crown, or the fangs, or the whole immortal overlord thing. It rarely felt relevant to discussions about whether hot dogs were sandwiches. He couldn't cancel. The request was already in the system. His counsel, in a rare display of unified glee, had approved it in record time. Which led him to the source of this entire debacle, the fraudulent request itself. He scrolled up the email chain, his own words mocking him, to the esteemed members of the Blood Council. It is with a heavy heart that I must confess a personal failing. For centuries we have adapted to the changing tides of the mortal world. Yet I, your king, have remained anchored to the past. The modern age, with its clicking boxes and glowing rectangles, is a sorcery I cannot decipher. The Aldrich Accord requires integration, and I have been remiss. I humbly request the services of a human specialist to guide my first steps into this bewildering new era. I fear that without aid, I shall remain technologically impaired. He laid it on so thick he was surprised the email hadn't dripped. He had written it in a fit of pique a month ago, after his Grand Chamberlain, Lord Valerius, had delivered his 10th lecture that week on the importance of the king having a public-facing digital presence. Valerius envisioned staid, boring announcements. Alaric knew his private Twitter account, @DraculaDidItFirst, was far more engaging. To shut Valerius up, he drafted the most pathetic, technologically illiterate plea he could imagine, assuming it would get buried in bureaucracy for a decade. Instead, they had rejoiced. They had called it a brave step towards true leadership in the modern age. They had fast-tracked it. And they had assigned him Nora. Panic gave way to a cold, creeping dread, which then morphed into a truly terrible, monumentally stupid idea. It was an idea born of desperation and the deeply ingrained instinct of a predator. When cornered, camouflage. He couldn't cancel the lessons, he couldn't reveal the truth. So he would have to do the only other thing he could. He would have to become the technologically impaired king he claimed to be. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and ozone. He could do this. He had survived sieges, inquisitions, and the disco era. He could survive pretending not to know what Wi-Fi was. For Nora. To preserve the fragile, perfect thing they had, he would become a complete and utter idiot. A sharp knock echoed through the study. Valerius entered, his posture as rigid as a tombstone. Your Majesty, the specialist from the integration office has arrived. She is waiting in the grand hall. Alaric straightened his spine, schooling his features into an expression of regal, slightly bewildered dignity. He minimized the Discord window, closed the tab with the 4K video of a capybara taking a bath, and stood. Excellent, Valerius, he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that bore no trace of the internal screaming. Let us not keep the poor woman waiting. I am eager to learn about this internet she is to show me. Valerius beamed, a horrifying sight. A momentous day, sire, a truly momentous day. Alaric swept from the room, a king marching toward his doom, or, more accurately, toward a woman who was about to spend an hour trying to teach him how to double-click. This was going to be the most exquisite form of torture ever devised. He couldn't wait. Nora Delacroix believed that the key to dealing with the absurd was a healthy dose of professional detachment, fortified by industrial-strength coffee. Her current assignment was testing the limits of both. The Grand Hall of Castle Vane was, to put it mildly, a bit much. The ceiling was so high it probably had its own weather system. The stained glass windows depicted scenes of vampiric conquest that were, frankly, in poor taste. And the sheer quantity of gargoyles felt like a safety hazard. It was the architectural equivalent of a 14-year-old Goth's trapper-keeper. Her client, the Vampire King himself, stood by a fireplace large enough to roast a whole buffalo, flanked by a stiff-looking vampire who could have been the poster child for constipated butler. The king was, well, he was exactly what you'd expect. Tall, dark, and ridiculously handsome in a way that screamed, I've had centuries to perfect this look. He wore a tailored black suit that probably cost more than her car, and his eyes held a deep, ancient intelligence, which made the whole situation even more bizarre. Ms. Delacroix, the king said, his voice a smooth baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the floor. "We are grateful for your presence. I am Alaric." "Your Majesty," Nora replied, giving a slight, professionally mandated nod. "It's a pleasure. Shall we get started?" "The file says you'd like to begin with basic mobile device operation." She held up the standard-issue tablet the office provided for these sessions. Alaric looked at the device as if it were a venomous snake. His gaze was a perfect blend of confusion, suspicion, and a hint of fear. It was, Nora had to admit, a masterful performance. "Ah, yes, the glowing rectangle," he said, approaching her slowly. "Valerius informs me it holds the key to all modern knowledge." The butler, Valerius, puffed out his chest. "Indeed, sire, the world at your fingertips." "Fascinating," Alaric murmured, peering at the screen. "And how does one activate it?" Nora suppressed a sigh. This was going to be a long day. "There's a button on the side, Your Majesty," she pointed. He leaned in, his proximity sending an unexpected jolt through her. He smelled of old books, expensive cologne, and something else, something faintly like ozone before a storm. It was distracting. He squinted at the button. "This small protuberance?" "That's the one." With the intense focus of a bomb disposal expert, Alaric extended one long, elegant finger and pressed the button. The screen lit up with the generic Integration Office logo. He recoiled as if he'd been shocked. "Sorcery," he breathed, his eyes wide. Nora blinked. "It's just a screen, sir." "Incredible," he said, his gaze fixed on the tablet. He looked up at her, and for a fleeting second, his ancient, intelligent eyes seemed to hold a flicker of something else, a glint of pure, unadulterated mischief. It was so fast she thought she'd imagined it. "Now," she said, steering them back on track, "this is the home screen. These little pictures are called apps. They're like programs." For the next hour, Nora patiently explained the concepts of swiping, tapping, and zooming. Alaric played the part of the befuddled monarch to perfection. He treated the touchscreen with the cautious delicacy of a man handling a holy relic. He called the Wi-Fi signal the invisible tether. He referred to the camera as a soul-stealing lens, which was at least thematically appropriate. Throughout it all, his internal monologue was a raging torrent of self-flagellation. "Gods, she's even more captivating in person," he thought, as she explained the function of the volume rocker. That little frown of concentration, the way she pushes her glasses up her nose. "Stop it, Alaric. You are a bumbling technophobe. You do not notice captivating frowns. You are bewildered by the concept of screen brightness." "And if you press this icon here," Nora was saying, tapping the settings gear, "you can adjust things like the brightness of the screen." "You can command its very luminescence?" he asked, feigning awe. "Truly, a marvel of the age." "Luminescence? Who says luminescence? You sound like a thesaurus fell on your head." Lord _of_ lore would never say luminescence. He'd say, "Oh, cool, dark mode." Get a grip. The lesson concluded with him successfully opening the calculator app and adding 2 and 2. He held up the tablet, displaying the number 4 with the triumphant air of a man who had just solved cold fusion. "I have calculated," he announced. Valerius, who had been observing from the sidelines, actually shed a single dramatic tear. "Magnificent, sire." Nora just nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good job, Your Majesty. We can pick this up again next week. Maybe we'll tackle the internet browser." "The web of interconnected knowledge?" Alaric asked, his voice full of faux trembling anticipation. "Yeah," she said, packing her bag. "Or, as most people call it, the place you go to watch cat videos." Her lips quirked into a small smile. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all day, and it hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was Pixel_Vixen's smile. Wry, a little tired, but utterly real. "I look forward to it, Ms. Delacroix," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She met his eyes, and the professional mask slipped for a second. "Call me Nora." And then she was gone, her sensible shoes clicking on the marble floor, leaving Alaric alone with his fraudulent triumph and a growing sense of impending disaster. He had survived the first lesson, but as he looked at the tablet in his hands, he logged into his private Discord account with a few practiced, lightning-fast taps. A new message from Pixel_Vixen was waiting. Pixel_Vixen. You will not believe the day I had. My new client thinks Wi-Fi is powered by ghosts. Alaric stared at the message, a groan escaping his lips. He typed out a reply. Lord of Lore. Sounds rough. Tell me everything. This was fine. Everything was perfectly, horribly fine. The weeks that followed settled into a bizarre rhythm. By day, Alaric was the world's most inept technology student. He struggled valiantly with the concept of email attachments. He expressed profound philosophical confusion over the existence of the spam folder. Why would a purveyor of preserved meats wish to contact me so insistently? He spent 20 minutes of one lesson trying to speak to the search bar on Google. Nora remained a bastion of patience, though Alaric could see the strain around her eyes. He saw the way she would pinch the bridge of her nose when he asked, for the third time, how to copy and paste. He could feel her silently counting to 10. And yet, through the fog of his feigned incompetence, something was happening. They were talking. In between his struggles to understand what a hyperlink was, he would ask her about her day. She, in turn, started treating him less like a revered monarch and more like a particularly challenging, slightly eccentric student. Okay, so for the last time, the cloud is not an actual physical cloud, she explained during their fourth session, her voice laced with the thinnest wire of exasperation. It's just a network of servers. Think of it as a magical library in the sky that holds your photos. A library in the sky? Alaric mused, looking thoughtfully out the window at the perpetually gray sky above his domain. And this library, it is secure? What if a griffin flies through it? Nora dropped her head into her hands for a brief moment before resurfacing with a weary smile. No griffins, Your Majesty, I promise. It's all protected by passwords. Ah, yes, the secret words. He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. I have been pondering my own secret word. I was thinking of password 123. Do you think it is sufficiently cunning? He watched as she physically bit her lip to keep from laughing, a small victory. It's a bold choice, sir, very unexpected. The line between Alaric the King and Alaric, Lord of Lore, was beginning to blur in the most dangerous way. He was using his online persona's dry humor in his real-life performance. He was trying to make her laugh, not just fool her. He found himself looking forward to their lessons with an eagerness that was entirely unbecoming of a man perpetrating a low-level government fraud. By night, he would talk to her on Discord, listening to her complain about him. Pixel_Vixen. He asked me today if he needed to feed the computer mouse. I swear he's doing it on purpose. No one can be this clueless. Lord of Lore. Maybe he's just lonely. Old castles, probably drafty. Maybe he just likes your company. Pixel_Vixen. You think? He's the vampire king. He could have anyone's company. He probably has a whole staff just for company having. Lord_of_lore. Still, kings are people too. I bet it's hard to have a normal conversation when everyone is bowing and scraping. Maybe he's just happy to have someone treat him like a person who can't figure out how to right-click. There was a long pause before she replied. Pixel_Vixen. You know, you're not wrong. He has these moments where he looks tired. And he asks about my cat. It's weirdly sweet. Alaric's undead heart did a strange little flutter. She saw it. Even through the ridiculous charade, she saw a little piece of the truth. The charade, however, was becoming harder to maintain. His muscle memory was a constant threat. He had to consciously stop himself from typing at 100 words a minute, forcing his fingers to peck at the on-screen keyboard like a confused chicken. He nearly gave the game away during a lesson on online shopping when she pulled up Amazon. "So you see," she said, pointing to the cart icon, "you add items to your basket and then you proceed to check out. One simply places digital representations of goods into a spectral conveyance?" he asked, trying to sound amazed. It was difficult, given that his own subscribe and save list included a bi-monthly shipment of 500 thread count sheets, several obscure history textbooks, and a frankly embarrassing amount of sour gummy worms. "Exactly," she said, navigating to the search bar. "You can buy anything here. What should we look for?" He said, the familiar verbal tick slipping out before he could stop it. A curious question. One might argue that the pursuit of novelty socks is the cornerstone of modern e-commerce. Nora froze. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowing. She stared at him, not at the king, but at him. Alaric's blood ran cold. He had been quoting, almost verbatim, a conversation they'd had on Discord just last night. They'd been riffing on the absurdity of targeted ads, and he'd written that exact sentence. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice quiet. Panic. Raw, unthinking panic. He had to deflect. I merely observed the vibrancy of the hosiery available," he stammered, gesturing vaguely at the screen. "A truly remarkable selection of foot coverings." "Foot coverings? You sound like an alien pretending to be a robot." "Smooth, Alaric, incredibly smooth." Nora's eyes remained on him for a long, uncomfortable moment. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with feigned incompetence and everything to do with dawning suspicion. She didn't push it, but the professional warmth in her expression had been replaced by a sharp, analytical curiosity. The look a scientist gives a specimen right before sliding it under a microscope. The lesson ended shortly after, the mood stilted and awkward. Alaric retreated to his study, his hands shaking slightly. It was a close call. Too close. He was getting sloppy, letting his real self bleed through. He logged onto Discord, needing the familiar comfort of their anonymous banter. But as he sat there, staring at the chat window, he realized the truth. He was tired of the act. He didn't want to be the bumbling king with Nora anymore. He wanted to be the person she actually talked to every night. He wanted to be her friend, in the light, not just in the shadows of the internet. But he had built this lie so carefully, and now he was trapped inside it. The walls were closing in. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she was going to figure it out. And he had no idea what would happen when she did. He just hoped that when the explosion came, he wouldn't lose the only person who had made him feel like more than just a monument in a very, very long time. Suspicion, once planted, is a hardy weed. Nora Delacroix had spent the week since the novelty socks incident, replaying every conversation, every lesson, every interaction with King Alaric Vane in her mind. It was the Lord of Lore, her brilliant, funny, and endearingly nerdy Discord friend, started nearly every debatable statement with It was his signature, a verbal throat-clearing before he launched into a witty, well-reasoned argument about why a grimoire bound in human skin was an inefficient data storage method. And the king had done it. Not just the word, but the cadence. The thoughtful pause, the slight tilt of the head. It was identical. Coincidence? Possible. The world was a strange place. But then there was the phrasing. Cornerstone of modern e-commerce. That wasn't the vocabulary of a man who, just 10 minutes prior, had been marveling at the concept of a drop-down menu. That was the vocabulary of a fluent, native speaker of internet. That was Lord of Lore's voice. Her first theory was that the king was somehow feeding Lord of Lore information. A truly bonkers conspiracy-level theory where the vampire king had a secret tech advisor who also happened to be her Discord buddy. She dismissed it as insane. Her second theory was even more insane, but it fit the facts with a terrifying neatness. She spent a few nights scrolling back through 2 years of chat logs with Lord of Lore. He'd never mentioned his job, but he often complained about his management council and archaic institutional policies. He had an obsession with history, correcting her on minute details of the Roman Empire with an authority that went beyond a simple hobbyist. He typed with a formal, slightly old-fashioned grammar that he disguised with modern slang, almost like English was his first language, but a version of it from a few centuries ago. He kept nocturnal hours. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. Nora felt a cascade of emotions. Shock, first and foremost. Then a hot flare of anger. He was playing her. For weeks, she had been patiently teaching this man how to use a tablet, feeling a mixture of pity and professional pride, while he was secretly laughing at her. He had let her complain about him to him, the sheer galling audacity of it. But underneath the anger was something else, a strange, confusing flutter of amusement and something warmer. He wasn't a clueless monarch. He was her friend. The witty, intelligent, slightly lonely person she'd been talking to every night for 2 years. The fraud wasn't a malicious prank, it was a panic move. A deeply weird, incredibly elaborate, and frankly hilarious panic move. She wasn't dealing with a bumbling fool. She was dealing with a world-class nerd with extreme social anxiety. This changed everything. The game had a new set of rules, and Nora intended to win. She arrived for their next lesson with a plan. It was devious. It was petty. It was perfect. Alaric greeted her in the castle library, a vast, 2-story room that smelled intoxicatingly of aging paper and leather. He was standing by a window, looking out at the rain, and for a moment, stripped of his technophobe act, he just looked pensive. Lonely, even. Her anger wavered. She firmed her resolve. He deserved to squirm a little. "Good afternoon, Your Majesty," she said, her voice professionally cheerful. "Ready to continue our journey into the digital realm?" Alaric turned, his mask of polite confusion snapping back into place. "Ms. Delacroix, of course. I have been practicing the swiping motion, as you instructed. My thumb is quite sore." "I can imagine," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Today I thought we'd try something a little more fun. A cultural lesson, you might say." She took out her own personal phone, a newer model than the clunky tablet the office provided. Alaric's eyes, she noted, flickered to it with the brief, acquisitive gleam of a true tech enthusiast, before he remembered he was supposed to be impressed by a calculator. "The young people of today," she began, adopting a lecturer's tone, "communicate through a very peculiar medium. They are called memes." Alaric's composure was flawless. He simply raised a curious eyebrow. "Memes? Is that a type of digital bird?" "Close," Nora said, her voice dangerously sweet. "It's a form of visual humor. An image, often with text, that conveys a specific, shared cultural idea. For example," she scrolled through her camera roll, past photos of her cat and a few embarrassing selfies, until she found the one she was looking for. She had saved it months ago, for a moment just like this, though she hadn't known it at the time. It was a stupid picture. A screenshot from a ridiculously obscure, low-budget 1970s fantasy film they had both watched ironically one night. The film was called The Sorcerer of Grell, and it featured a wizard whose spells were all activated by aggressively buttering a piece of toast. They had laughed themselves sick over it. Lord of Lore had taken a screenshot of the wizard, mid-buttering, his face a mask of intense concentration, and had captioned it, "Me applying my singular talent to all of life's problems." It was their joke, theirs alone. No one else on the server had even seen the movie. There was no way he wouldn't recognize it. She turned the phone to him. "Here is a popular one." Alaric leaned in to look. Nora watched his face, every micro-expression, every flicker of his ancient eyes. She saw the moment of recognition hit him. It wasn't a dramatic gasp, it was subtler, a fractional widening of his pupils, a sudden sharp intake of breath. The carefully constructed mask of the bumbling king didn't just crack, it vaporized. He stared at the image of the toast-buttering wizard. His mind, which could process battlefield logistics in seconds and recall thousand-year-old treaties verbatim, went utterly, devastatingly blank. There was no protocol for this. No escape. It was a checkmate delivered with a JPEG. His training, his discipline, his centuries of royal composure, all failed him. His mouth opened, and the words came out before he could stop them, a reflex born of 2 years of friendship and shared laughter. "The key is to use unsalted butter," he said, his voice a horrified whisper. "For spell consistency." It was the punchline, the exact, perfect punchline he had typed to her on Discord at 3 a.m. 6 months ago. Silence descended upon the Grand Library. A heavy, profound silence, broken only by the drumming of rain against the stained glass windows and the frantic, panicked thumping of a vampire king's long-dormant heart. Nora slowly lowered her phone. She looked at him, her expression a flat, unreadable mask. He looked back at her, his face a portrait of a man who had just watched his own ghost float out of his body. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 3. Then, Nora Delacroix, Integration Office Specialist, threw her head back and screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, cathartic, incandescent frustration. It was the sound of 6 weeks of patronizing lessons, of biting her tongue, of explaining what a captcha was to a man who probably invented the concept of secret societies. It was the scream of a woman who had been well and truly had. The sound echoed off the leather-bound books and vaulted ceilings. A flock of bats in the rafters stirred uneasily. When the scream finally subsided, she was panting, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Alaric just stood there, frozen. Then, the first truly honest words he'd spoken to her in person tumbled out. "I am so sorry." Nora pointed a trembling finger at him. "You," she seethed, her voice low and furious. "You run 3 meme accounts." "Only 2 are cat-related," he offered weakly, as if that helped. "You told me you thought a hashtag was a waffle-shaped sigil." "I may have taken some creative liberties with my backstory," he admitted, wincing. "Creative liberties?" She took a step forward, her eyes blazing. "You committed government fraud. You wasted weeks of my time. You let me complain to you about how annoying my new client was, and all you said was, sounds rough." "In my defense," he said, scrambling for any foothold of logic, "it did sound rough." That was the wrong thing to say. Nora's face, which had been a mask of fury, suddenly crumpled. The anger washed away, replaced by the sheer, overwhelming absurdity of the situation. A bubble of laughter escaped her, then another. Soon, she was leaning against a bookshelf, laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. It was Alaric's turn to be baffled. He had expected shouting. He had expected her to storm out. He had expected, perhaps, to be reported to the integration office for gross misconduct. He had not expected this helpless, hysterical laughter. You absolute nerd," she gasped between peals of laughter. "All of this entire ridiculous performance, because you were too scared to just say hello?" The truth of it, laid bare so simply, was more damning than any accusation. "Yes," he said quietly, the shame hitting him full force. "I panicked. I saw your profile and I realized who you were, and I didn't want to ruin it. What we have online. It's important to me. I thought the king would scare you off, or change things." Her laughter subsided, leaving a thoughtful quiet in its wake. She pushed her glasses up her nose and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the filter of their respective roles. She saw not the king and not the bumbling student, but the man who had stayed up late with her, dissecting the plot holes in her favorite movies. The man who had sent her a care package of gourmet coffee after she'd complained about a bad week at work. Her friend. "You didn't think to just message me? As you?" she asked, her voice soft now. The thought was terrifying, he confessed. Lord of Lore is just a guy on the internet. Alaric Vane is a lot. I didn't want to impose all of this, he gestured around the cavernous library, on our friendship. Nora crossed her arms, a wry smile finally returning to her face. Well, you certainly imposed something, namely, a 6-week acting class where I was the unwilling audience. She tapped her chin, a calculating glint in her eye. I think you owe me. Alaric straightened up, relieved beyond measure that she wasn't running for the door. Anything, name it. A duchy? A chest of ancient gold? My finest crypt? Don't be ridiculous, she scoffed. You owe me dinner, for the government fraud, for the emotional whiplash, and for making me sit through your truly terrible performance as a man who has never seen a pop-up ad. He felt a smile, a real one, touch his own lips. It felt strange and wonderful. Just dinner? I feel my crimes warrant a far greater penance. We'll start with dinner, she corrected. And you're paying, with actual money, not some ancient cursed ducat. The relief washing over him was so profound it was almost dizzying. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was still her. Still Pixel_Vixen. I would owe you dinner for the rest of my very long life, Nora Delacroix, and it would not be enough. He said it with all the sincerity of a 1,000-year-old vow, a weight of truth that surprised even himself. Nora's smile softened. The last of the tension melted from her shoulders, leaving only the warm, familiar spark of their friendship, now crackling in the real world. Well, she said, her eyes twinkling with the same wit he'd come to adore through a screen. I'd owe you forever. That works too. The dinner did not take place in the castle's cavernous dining hall, with its long, intimidating table and portraits of glowering ancestors. At Nora's insistence, it took place in Alaric's private study, the one with the gaming chair and the triple monitors. And the menu, also at her insistence, was pizza. 3 large pizzas, to be exact, delivered by a very nervous young man who was tipped so extravagantly he nearly fainted at the castle gates. Alaric had watched the entire process with genuine fascination, not at the pizza, but at Nora. She had taken charge with an easy confidence, directing the guards on where to meet the delivery driver and batting away Valerius's scandalized protests that His Majesty could not possibly dine on peasant-bred circles. He's a grown man, Valerius, she'd said, not unkindly. He can eat what he wants. Besides, we have a very important, legally mandated fraud debriefing to attend to. Valerius had retreated, muttering about declining standards. Now they sat opposite each other, not at a desk, but in 2 comfortable armchairs Alaric had hastily dragged in front of the cold fireplace. A stack of pizza boxes rested on a low table between them. It was awkward. It was new. It was infinitely better than any of the stilted lessons. So, Nora said, taking a large bite of a supreme slice. Lord of Lore, huh? A bit on the nose, don't you think? Alaric, who was delicately dabbing a bit of sauce from his lip with a silk handkerchief, managed a small smile. I thought it was clever. A play on words. It's a dad joke, Alaric. A millennia-old dad joke. She pointed a crust at him. And let's talk about the username. Did you even consider the optics? A vampire calling himself a Lord of Lore? It's like a wolf opening an account called definitely_not_a_wolf. He had the grace to look chagrined. It seemed more subtle at the time. My other choice was Vlad the Inhaler. Nora snorted, a laugh spraying a fine mist of soda. Okay, Lord of Lore was the right call. They ate in a comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the crackling of the fire Alaric had insisted on lighting and the quiet chewing. The strangeness of the situation began to settle over him. For 2 years, he had known her voice only through text on a screen. Now, her actual voice, laced with humor and warmth, filled his ancient study. He could see the way her nose crinkled when she laughed, the way she gestured with her hands when she was making a point. It was like seeing a beloved black and white film in color for the first time. "Why, though?" she asked, her tone shifting from teasing to serious. "Really, what were you so afraid of?" Alaric set his plate aside, giving her question the gravity it deserved. He looked around the room, at the towering shelves of first edition books, at the priceless artifacts sitting on his desk as paperweights, at the sheer oppressive weight of his own history. "All of this," he said, his voice low. "This isn't me. It's a title, a position, a collection of responsibilities and expectations built up over 1,000 years. People don't see Alaric. They see the vampire king. They see power or a monster or a political figure. They're afraid, or they want something, or they're trying to flatter me." He met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself. "No one just talks to me. Not about stupid movies, or whether a hot dog is a sandwich, or how their day was. On Discord, as Lord of Lore, I wasn't the king. I was just a guy. And you were the first person in centuries who treated me like one." He looked down at his hands. "I was a coward. I thought the moment you saw me, here, surrounded by all this grandeur," he said the word with distaste, "the friend I had would vanish. And I couldn't bear to lose that." Nora was quiet for a long time, her pizza forgotten. She watched him, her expression softening. The anger was long gone, replaced by a profound empathy. All the little comments Lord of Lore had made about being lonely, about the burdens of management, they all clicked into a much clearer, sadder picture. "You know," she said softly, "for what it's worth, you're a lot less intimidating when you're pretending to be baffled by a pop-up ad." He looked up, a flicker of a smile on his face. "Was my performance that convincing?" "It was terrible," she said bluntly, "painfully so. You had the earnest, wide-eyed confusion of a soap opera character with amnesia. I should have seen through it in the first 5 minutes." "I practiced," he admitted. "I watched tutorials on YouTube. How to look like you've never seen a computer before." The acting advice was questionable. This sent them both into another round of laughter, breaking the tension. The rest of the dinner passed easily, the conversation flowing as naturally as it always had online. They talked about their favorite posters on the Discord server. He confessed to being the one who started the great pineapple on pizza war of last summer. She admitted she knew it was him all along. They argued about the ending of a popular TV show, their banter sharp and familiar, but now it was punctuated by shared glances and real smiles instead of emojis and text. As the evening wound down, they stood on one of the castle's many balconies, overlooking the glittering expanse of the city below. The rain had stopped and the air was clean and cool. The pizza boxes had been cleared away by a spectral, unseen hand, and the easy camaraderie of the study had followed them out into the night air. The playful energy between them settled into something quieter, more sincere. The jokes had stopped. "Thank you, Nora," Alaric said, his voice barely more than a murmur. He wasn't looking at the city, but at her. For seeing past the ridiculous fraud. For not running. "Where would I run?" she countered, her own voice soft. "You probably own the entire city block my apartment is on." "That's not what I mean." "I know," she said. She leaned against the cold stone of the parapet, turning to face him. "You know, for all your talk about being this big, scary monarch, you're not that different from your online persona. You're still a history nerd who makes terrible puns and gets way too invested in fictional characters." "I contain multitudes," he deadpanned, but there was no real humor in it. It was a statement of fact, a confession. "The king part is just a job," she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "A very old, very weird job with a lot of Gothic architecture, but it's not all of you. I liked Lord of Lore, and I think I like Alaric Vane, too. even if he is a menace who commits light treason for social reasons. He took a hesitant step closer. The space between them shrank, filled with a quiet, expectant energy. For all his millennia of existence, for all his power and knowledge, he felt as nervous as a teenager. "I like Nora Delacroix," he said, the words feeling more true than any royal decree he had ever issued. "More than she knows." Her smile was small, but it lit up her entire face. "Well, you owe me forever, remember? You've got plenty of time to show me." He reached out, his fingers hesitating for a moment before gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. Her skin was warm, alive. The brief contact sent a jolt through him, a spark of connection more real and powerful than any of the thousands of messages they had exchanged. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch ever so slightly, her eyes holding his. In that moment, the distance between them, of years, of species, of social standing, seemed to vanish completely. He was not a king, and she was not a government employee. They were just Alaric and Nora, two friends standing on a balcony, at the start of something that felt both terrifyingly new and as comfortable as an old joke. The charade was over. The truth was out. And as Alaric looked at the brilliant, funny, sarcastic woman before him, he realized that for the first time in a very, very long time, he didn't have to pretend to be anyone at all. And that was a magic far more powerful than any glowing rectangle.